Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is a new video in my Stencil 101 series. I've made Stencil tutorial series before, but I figured, over time, you know more, you can explain things better, so it's time to redo it again. And first, let's just talk about what Stencil is. So you have like the front-end frameworks, that's like React, Angular, Vue, Svelte, and what they do is they provide you tools to build a front-end UI. Now, what happened is that Ionic was originally what they built is like a component system. I think primarily originally was working with Angular, and I think it was mostly used for like building like mobile applications. They were sort of very responsive components. But as Angular became not the only dominant front-end framework, it made more sense to have sort of their component library work across different frameworks. Okay, so they didn't want one that's built within a framework but can work within frameworks. And that's the cool thing about the web component browser API. You can make web components that will work across frameworks because they're not built in a framework, they're built in a API specific to the browser. The problem with that is it's specific to the browser. Okay, so then you need some sort of DOM or browser DOM for that to work. So what Stencil does, it creates something that's kind of in the middle of everything. It basically creates components that are just plain JavaScript, but they're not completely using the web component API, extending HTML element, so that way it's not completely bound to the browser. So it allows you to create components, and again, the point of them building this tool was so that way the Ionic team could use it to build their Ionic components. So they're like, okay, we built this tool for us, but you can use it too. So now anyone can use this Stencil tool to create components that can work in Angular, Vue, React, Svelte. You just import it like you would import any kind of other JavaScript. You could even theoretically build entire applications in Stencil, okay, and then they'd be completely working applications. I've done it. So that's what Stencil is. It was originally created again to build framework agnostic web components that could work between frameworks, so that we don't have to worry about having to create a version of every component for Angular, React, Vue, Svelte. But at the same time, it wasn't necessarily meant to replace Angular, Vue, React, Svelte. Okay, but you could kind of use it in that role if you chose to. And really what it comes down to is that you're going to type code, in particularly using TypeScript and classes and JSX. And that code then gets compiled by the Stencil compiler, and the Stencil compiler compiles them into sort of a standalone form. And then that's how this works. Cool. So now that we kind of set the stage for what Stencil is, let's get started. Really, I always find this kind of unclear, but really the first thing you want to do is you want to do this. You want to just install it. This on your in your thing. So basically, I'm going to open up Terminal. So I created a new folder. And the first thing I always want to do is just, actually, I want to do that once I have the project. So I'm going to do npm init stencil, copy. I'm pretty sure I already have stencil installed, npm init. So on that note, actually, I think you do have to install this first. Control C. I think I want to install this globally. Oh, well, it's already doing that for me. Okay, not exactly what I wanted it to do, so let's just delete that. I wanted to do that globally, so that way I have the CLI available globally. So npm install -g. Okay, yep, it needs sudo. Okay, cool. So that's installed. So now I should be able to type in npm init stencil. And see, it brings me up this menu that allows me to choose what kind of project I want to make. So am I actually going to use the Ionic components to make a progressive web application? Again, a progressive web application is a web application that kind of mocks a mobile application. The difference is you don't actually have to upload this application to like an app store. So you don't have to worry about like App Store approvals and App Store fees. It's just a normally deployed web application that is built using like service workers, so it has offline capabilities. It's built with a very responsive design, so that when you open it up in a mobile browser, it feels like you're using a mobile app. That's sort of the point of progressive web applications. Down the road, chances are many web applications will kind of move in this direction, because why not? Why force you to have to download a separate app when we can just give you the same experience in the browser without the cost, without the approvals and delays, and without having to build multiple applications? You can just create a web application that does everything you want mobile. If you want to try to create an app with Stencil, you can just, a normal web app, you can choose this. And if you're just trying to create individual components that you want to use for your other applications, you can use this project. I'm going to use the app project. Then it's going to ask for a name. Okay, I'm going to call this project 1. That's going to end up being the name of the folder that it creates. And I'm going to say, yep, that's all good to me. And there it goes. So installed everything. See, there it is. So let's cd into project 1. Okay. And then here we go. So let's just take a look, explore what's inside this folder. Here you have a tsconfig.json. That's just for TypeScript. This is all configured already, so there's really no reason to touch it unless you have really custom TypeScript things you want to do, because you really know how the TypeScript config works. If you don't touch it. No need to. This is a specific configs for Stencil. Again, it's all configured for you, so you don't need to change it unless you really want to. Here is a README, just with some of the initial, like what the commands are and what they do in Stencil. Your package.json with all your commands. So when we're done, we're going to run this build command. And then there's also the start command that'll start our dev server. And if we want to do tests, we can do this. And then there's a generate command, so we can generate new components on the fly. Okay, that's kind of a nice feature. The way I describe Stencil is kind of a mix between Angular and React. It does everything in classes and does everything using TypeScript and decorators, kind of like Angular, but you're going to type out sort of your templates using JSX, kind of like React. So if you've used Angular and React, this is a good stepping. This is like, it'll make it easy to learn this. If you don't know either and you've learned this, like that's actually what happened to me. I learned Stencil before I learned React and Angular. It made it a lot easier to learn the three, because a lot of the ideas kind of were mixed and matched, but it did take me a while to remember which was which. License. Okay, it's just a license. This is just a prettier file for formatting your files. If you have prettier installed, your .gitignore, which ignores which files it Git, so Git won't push these files up. Editor config. I'm sure this is just basically telling your editor how the indentations and more formatting stuff. And basically all your source code, as usual, like if you've used React or Vue or any of these type of frameworks, all your code's in source, because basically what happens is these are your source, the compiler compiles what's inside your source and outputs it. Cool. So we go in here, we have a manifest.json, which again, I just think is just, these are just details that you can go deliver to the Stencil compiler. No need to touch it. There probably are things here you would want to change, but nothing you need to change at this moment. Okay, so this is something you would read up on in the documentation. Index.ts, this is just where everything kind of starts. Imports components, JSX, imports our router. Really nothing kind of goes on here. Index.html. This is just basically your HTML file. So if you wanted to make any changes to the HTML file, like include a script tag or something for like Bootstrap, you could do that here. So that is an option. Okay, components.ets. This is just sort of a registry of all the components that you've created. So that way the app knows when it compiles what you have available. I don't think you generally have to touch this. If you use the generate command, it'll make the entries that are needed in here. Like, yeah, this is not something I would touch. Cool. Then here, assets, this is where you can put like favicons, icons, stuff like, you know, your images, your static files. Global, this is your global CSS and TypeScript file. Okay, so if you wanted to set up any kind of code that is kind of global. If you want to set up any CSS that's global to your entire app, here's where you would do it. Okay. So that's that. Components. And this is where all your components will live. Okay, the entry point for your application is going to be this app root component. And notice everything has a dash in front of it because this does use the web component spec a bit. So it means that these web components, okay, these web components do use kebab case, because in order to register a web component, the browser registry does require that any custom elements have a two-part name with a dash in the middle of it, also known as kebab case. Cool. So that's a little tour of the file structure. So let's run our server. So npm start. So it's compiling and it all broke. Okay. Okay. Looks like it does want me to install that library. So let me do Control C. I think it's just a matter of hitting npm install. And that should just fix everything. So it'll install what it needs. Okay. Yep. So I added a few packages, and then we do npm start. Okay, it's initializing the first build, so it's all fancy, and then you get this app. So this is essentially the app root page. And the cool thing is that like Stencil has router built in. Okay, so you have a router built in. It works just like React Router if you've ever used it. So you have that kind of out of the gate. So let's examine this root component. Now, each component is generally going to be made up of 3 files. You have a CSS file for that component. You have a end-to-end testing file, which if you wanted to run tests, you can do that here. I always forget which testing library it's using. I generally always want to default to saying it's Jest, but it could be something else, like Mocha or something. I wonder if it's in the package.json. Hey, package.json, tell us what it is. Nope, doesn't tell me what it is. I'm sure it's in the documentation. Okay, and then you have your TSX file. Again, that just means TypeScript. And this is where your components live. Okay, so let me just move this down a little bit. And if you've used React, this is going to look very familiar. But basically the idea is that there's several decorators you have to import from Stencil to use each component. In this case, the component decorator is what notifies the Stencil compiler that it is a component, tells it like what the tag's going to be. So it tells it that like the HTML tag is going to be app root. If you have like a style sheet specifically for this component, you can point it to it. And here you specify whether it has a shadow DOM. A shadow DOM just means that its style, its DOM is encapsulated. So technically, it's not in the DOM. Like all this HTML here is not going to show up in the DOM. It's going to show up in a little mini DOM for this component. And basically, any CSS from the outside will not be able to pierce through the shadow DOM. So all the styles have to come from the inside. Because generally the point of web components is encapsulation. You want to create something that's kind of standalone that you can reuse from project to project. So you want to create a modal that you can use over and over again. You want to create, so it's your choice if you want to use that or not, but that's what that is. Okie dokie. And then if you're familiar with React class components, that's essentially what you do here. You just return a class with a render function. Okay, so it's just like React. But you use decorators like Angular, and we use TypeScript like Angular. So all our variables have to be delivered here. Okay, and then notice, see, we have Stencil Router. Okay, and Stencil Router works a lot like React Router. Okay, so basically this piece right here is the router provider. Okay, and then the router switch basically says anything in between the switch, there's routes, and these routes can then be pointing to different components based on the URL, and that's all fine and good. Okay, so we see we have 2 routes. The root route, which renders app home right away. Okay, and then we have the app profile. Cool. So that's all fine and good. Let's show you actually making a component. Okay, so let's make one from scratch. So let's go here. Actually, I'll just open up another terminal. CD into project 1. And let's do npm run generate. It's going to ask me a name, component tag name. Let's just call this my button. Keep it real simple. And yeah, we want a style sheet here. You can like toggle on and off the stuff that you want. I really don't want the test file right now. Oh, well, I hit enter, so my bad. I think it was spacebar what I was supposed to hit. So now if I go to my components, see a folder has been created with my button. All the appropriate details have been added to components.d.ts. Don't need to touch it. And then here I go to my button. And then here you get a very basic component. Okay. And the CSS file's kind of already set up for you. See, like the basics are already set up for you. Okay, I'm just going to delete all this, and we're just going to create a button. Cool. And this button first will say hello. Okay, this button will say hello. Okay, and then we'll just try out the button. So let's go back to our app home, because that's going to be what we see visually on the page right away. To our app home.tsx, and let's just add a few of these hello buttons. And see, I don't have to import the button. Okay, so this is like Angular, where instead of importing the components inside each component, this components.dts acts like a sort of global registry. Okay, and I'll just make like 3 of them. Cool. So let's go back to the browser and take a look what's going on. Oh, it doesn't like it. Cannot find module puppeteer or its corresponding type declarations. Cannot find name buffer. Okay. TypeScript. And yeah, the TypeScript errors can be really annoying here. So let's see, cannot find name it. Did you mean to install definitions for a test runner? I jest. I'll delete those files. My button test. I'm just going to delete that. Let's see if that gets rid of some of these errors. Okay, not all of them. See here, app root. Let's get rid of all these end-to-end testing files. It just wants me to install testing stuff, and I don't want to. So in that case, I will delete the testing files. Okay. Now it's actually looking for those files. Let me take a look under the hood. I'll be right back. Okay, I just had to restart the compiler. I am assuming that when the compiler goes, it creates a directory of all the files. And so, yeah, I just had to restart the dev server. But see, here we have 3 buttons. Hello, hello, hello. So I created that component, and that was pretty straightforward. So now let's just show you how to do props. So if I want to create a prop that shows like what's on the button, so let's go over here, my button. Okay, you're just going to use the decorator @prop. And it should be like @props, and I think I have to import that. So @prop. Yeah, I think it's prop. And then that's a function. And then here I say what the name of the prop is. The name of the prop is, we'll call it text, and it's a string because it's, again, TypeScript, so we have to define our prop. Okay, so that's that. And then we want to use that here. Now here's the part I always forget. I always forget if it's... let's see here. Can I find name text? Do you mean this instance member? Yeah, so it is this dot text. There we go. So then over here, I can now pass in a prop. Text. Hello. Text. Cheese. Text. Gouda. Okay, so there's my prop. So I should have 3 buttons with 3 different pieces of text on them. There you go. Hello, cheese, Gouda. Okay, so there you go. So you can use props pretty easily. Okay, that's not anything crazy, but it's typed. So that, again, you get the benefits of TypeScript kind of catching your errors and stuff like that. Again, this was built for, you know, really high production quality components from the Ionic team. So that's why there's all this really sophisticated testing and typing stuff kind of configured in there. So that way you have all those checks. You have your type checks. You have your testing functions. You have everything you need to make sure that everything is going to work if you want to put in the time. Okay, cool. So that's just how prop works. Okay, so let's go back to my button. Okay, let's make this button have a counter. So let's see here. We'll create it. So what we'll do is we'll have an H1 that we need to include state. Okay, so there's the state piece. I'm going to take host out since I don't use it. Okay, I am going to use state. State, again, works the same way. At state. And then I just say I want to call it count. And count will be a number. Okay, and then we're going to use this dot count here. And I need a fragment because no, I guess maybe there aren't fragments in Stencil. There we go. Otherwise, the rules of JSX apply. I have to have a top level element. So let me just do that. Nope, I'm missing a curly bracket over here. And we're good to go. So now we want to make it where this button has a function that adds to the count. Okay, so let's write a function. Okay, and so that would just be, and this is a class, so you can just write a normal class function. So we'll just write handle click. Takes no arguments, returns nothing, so I don't need to do any typing there. And all this should do is just do this dot count equals, and if I'm right here, I don't have to worry about like a set state function or anything like that. Here I can just update state, but we'll find out in a moment. Plus 1. Okay, so this dot count plus 1. And then we attach that function onto this. So again, this is JSX, so you have to use camel case when naming your functions. And that's going to be this dot handle click. Cool. Okay, so theoretically now I should be able to click this button and it should add 1 to that one's count. So let's refresh. I don't see the 0. So, oh, because I didn't put a default number, that's why. So let me put equals 0. So that way it starts at 0. Good. Okay, cool. So I click hello. So I guess maybe I do need to use set state for this one. Let's go to components, read the documentation, internal state. Do I need to use set state here? This dot open. So here's the state variable, open boolean. Yeah, no, it's just a straight up assignment. Okay, so that works for me. Okay, here's where I made a mistake. Here's how we define an event at listen for click. And then we decorate the function with that. Okay, gotcha. Okay, see, everything's done with decorators, so it takes a while to get used to. So listen, so I add listen to my button. So I'm gonna take off this whole on click thing. So nope, it's not too much like React. Okay, and then I have to decorate this click saying at listen. And then this is going to listen for a click event from that. And I will just put the capture true, assuming that I need that. No, I think it was an object. Capture. True. And if you're not familiar with decorators, it's like this whole @listen thing. All these are actually functions, but when you write the function, when you use the function like this, when you say @listen, so you actually wrote a function called listen, but since you wrote, you put it as @listen, it decorates the handle click function. The decorator always applies itself to whatever's right after it. So this listen decorator applies itself to this function. This @prop decorator applies itself to this variable, and it gives it some sort of extra functionality. So in this case, this becomes defined as props and has the functionality of props. This becomes state and has the functionality of state, and this now has a listener attached to it. Okay. So now let's go back and give this a shot. Okay. Let's refresh the page. There we go. And now it works. Okay, so we have our listener that's listening for the event. Let's see, each one is a separate instance of the component. Okay, and again, once the component's defined, we can use it just like an HTML tag. So if I go back to home where I use the button, see, we use it. So what did we learn in this video? We learned how to set up a stencil project. We learned how to use state and props, how to create a component, and a little bit more about these decorators in Stencil. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a great day and enjoy.